person. She is. All right, so I will just start with like your general, like what do you typically, we're talking for the sake of the listeners, for a 7 o'clock call for you. What are you typically going on a 7 p.m. evening and wherever
Uh,
you are?
well, I can tell you exactly what I'm doing. I'm about to sip a glass of red wine, which is about 7 p.m. That's about the perfect time, I'd say.
What can you tell us about this wine? Are you a wine connoisseur by any
I
stretch?
would I would love to tell you I know my Merlots from my Margaux, but I like wine, but I'm not that fussy, to be honest. Whatever if it's wet, red or white, you know, I'm not that fussy. This was actually given to me by a friend in Italy. We were just over there, and he just handed me a bottle of wine from his neighbourhood. So no, it's a nice opportunity to open it. But today I've actually had I'm in my studio at the moment, and I've been working today with a guy called Richard Hudson, who was the drummer in the Strawbs, the band the Strawbs from the 60s and 70s. And I've known him for a long, long time. My dad used to play in the Strawbs back in the 60s. And then I've jumped in a couple of times over the years just for various tours when they needed a keyboard player. So I've known Richard Hudson for all my life pretty much, and he's in his sort of late 60s now, and he's been working on an album for a few years, and I'm just helping him finish it off. So we were doing some string quartet arrangements today. So it's been a really nice day. It's been a very productive day considering the weather here is horrendous in the UK.
I mean, what are we talking? We got just like another rainy day. I've been to the UK once and it mostly rained.
Well, yeah, I think there's a kind of balance. If you set a kind of benchmark of English and British rain, right? And it's always raining, but we don't notice that. We don't notice it that it's always really raining. It's just English weather. This has been more sort of torrential kind of monsoon type rain,
Lovely.
and there's flooding, and we've had more rain in the last couple of days than we normally get in at least 2 months in the winter. So it's causing absolute chaos. So fortunately, nothing's leaking in here, so it's all good.
Hopefully it doesn't impact the mood of whatever you're working on too much.
No, no, not at all.
So I'd like to also start with just like a story I'm pretty sure you're sick of telling to some degree is like how Jazz Sabbath came to be. Because there's the lore behind it, of course, but like the real story that I've read is that you were just kind of someone was calling out songs for you to play, essentially, a security guard.
It was in Berlin, and it was on the Sabbath tour. I can't remember which year it would have been. Probably 2017, something like that, which would have been the End tour, I guess. And yeah, we're in Berlin in a hotel. Ozzy, Tony, and Geezer had gone to bed. So I'd been out for some drinks with some friends. I came back to the hotel bar, and Tony's security guard, a guy called Didier, who's from Belgium, was just sat having a coffee in the bar. So I came in and had a couple of drinks and chatted to him. And there was a piano in the corner of the bar, and there was nobody else in there. The hotel, bar was empty. He said, "Oh, why don't you play the Sabbath set on the piano?" And I said, "Well, I can, but it will sound shit unless you can do it in a sort of, I don't know, a different style, like a lounge jazz style." So I started playing what was Iron Man, just with kind of major seven chords, and it just sounded funny. So noodled about with that for a bit, and that was kind of the end of it. When I went to bed, I thought actually that would be a really interesting idea, is to try and take all the Sabbath songs and make them into a kind of jazz style. Now, my kind of preference with jazz from a listening perspective is the kind of New Orleans blues jazz. Oscar Peterson's about as far kind of deep as I like to go with it. I'm not keen on the kind of Pet Shop on Fire kind of sounding jazz. It's more kind of the melodic and Thelonious Monks, Dr. John, Duke Ellington, all the kind of the sort of classic sort of sounding piano stuff. But I like the kind of Monty Alexander and that kind of vibe, which is a bit more bluesy. So I just sort of went about kind of arranging a couple of pieces to see how it would sound, and then I thought it'd be great if I could bring an element of comedy to it. Um, and so I created this character called Milton Keanes. Now, Milton Keanes is a city about 15 miles from where I live, and I've just always thought it's the perfect jazz pianist name, Milton Keanes. It sounds like a jazz pianist. So I thought, well, I call myself Milton Keanes. I'll be an 85, 90-year-old kind of disillusioned uh, jazz pianist who thinks that he's written all these songs. And then I started to develop the mockumentary and the story behind it, and it became, to begin with, it became more about me writing the comedy documentary, before I'd really got too involved in the music, because I wanted to make sure that Sharon and Ozzy and Tony and everyone were happy with me doing it, because I wouldn't have done it if they weren't, if they weren't happy to do it. I didn't want them to think I was, taking the mick out of them. It was, it's done in jest, but in good humour. And I know they've got, they're English, so they've got good English sense of humour, so they get the kind of joke behind it. Um, and uh, and I've always loved that mix of comedy and music. Now, from the actual music perspective, it's very credible, and hopefully it's very genuine. It comes across that way, because that's the other side of it. And when we do live shows, it's quite experimental. It's very free. There's parts that can go anywhere, and they can be 5 minutes or 15 minutes long. Um, and that kind of freedom for the whole band is just a really refreshing thing. When most bands that you work with, it's done to a time code and click, and the start and end of a show is the same every night.
Yeah, my next question was actually, did you have to run the lore by anybody at the Sabbath camp? So you did, and they were like fine with it.
Absolutely, yeah. It took a while because I didn't want to. I wanted to make sure they understood what I was doing, rather than just sit there having a coffee saying, "Oh, I want to do this thing," and I dress up as an old man, and that's kind of, you know, that's sort of what happens. That's the kind of, um, I wanted to avoid any ambiguity with them thinking that it's actually something that it wasn't. I just wanted them to know it's great music. Obviously, it's Black Sabbath, but it's arrangements done in a credible kind of jazz style. Oh, and I dress up as an 85-year-old man.
Asterix, I'm also dressing up as
Yeah.
a gent older than any of you. When you're reworking the songs, I'm guessing you start off with the main, like most memorable riff or something, produce that on piano, and then from there, is it like, how planned out is it for the record, I guess, or is it like improvising, finding the vibe in the room and recording that, or like what's actually going into the studio? Like, because you mentioned, jazz explorations on stage. Is the studio similar?
It's kind of like the way I worked it was I tried to find, I would put on a track for starters, say, I don't know what, Fairies Wear Boots, for example. And the most identifiable bit for me is that guitar riff, the da 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 ba da. So I kind of played that in a kind of a sort of jazz fashion. I moved the chords into a little bit more complicated chords rather than just fifths. Um, and then took the vocal melody, and they were basically my two key points. Now, with a lot of the other songs, I don't even play the vocal melody, and it's just the guitar chords. Like Iron Man, for example, is such, it's that guitar riff that everybody knows. And obviously, when the vocal comes in, it sings the same riff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of different. It depends on what each song kind of gives to you, if that makes any sense. It's like
Absolutely.
it will kind of any of the tunes that I felt took more than sort of 10, 15 minutes to just to get a vibe about, I just shelved them straight away. So I was like, I'm trying to think of a track that I tried, but a Planet Caravan, for example. I worked around it for sort of 15 minutes or so, and I'm like, I can't get this to sound how I would, how it feels natural to play. And I didn't want any of it to be like a struggle. I want it to be natural so that when we play it live, it can be really relaxed and you can push the boundaries a bit when you come to the improvisation. So yeah, to start with, it was just a case of sitting down, finding which songs came naturally, and then worked on the arrangements. And obviously, it wasn't like a 10-minute thing. It was kind of, you know, I didn't want to make each track follow the same arrangement as the original. I took the bits that I liked and I thought worked best, and then wrote other sections, and then the improvising sort of sections. Certainly on the new album, there's some bits on there that, you know, bear absolutely no resemblance to any of the, you know, any of the original track. But that's kind of fun because people listening to it then go back to listen to Black Sabbath, and they kind of work out what bits are new, what bits are kind of familiar. You know, I certainly get it with live shows where people are, you know, not necessarily huge Sabbath fans, but they're music fans and they're aware of lots of Sabbath songs, but they're not diehard fans. So they're not going to know the kind of, you know, the deeper cuts from the records that you know we've covered. Sorry, we wrote.
Of course.
Put my guard down there. So it's kind of yeah. I mean, it's a great process. It's a really fun process. It's almost a shame when it's done because it's, you know, that bit's the arrangements are kind of probably the most fun bit because that's where you can be the most creative.
When you're able to stretch out as like moments, I actually appreciate this about Black Sabbath as well. So like the end of Spiral Architect on the original is like wildly different from so much of what they have done before. And on your version, it goes in a completely different direction. And pardon me if I'm using the incorrect genre slash subgenre label, but to me it sounds kind of like a bossa nova sort of deal. Um, how do you get there, or like the big sax parts in Into the Void, to spoil parts of the new record a little bit?
um, I don't really, honestly, I don't really know. It kind of just the process evolves, and it might get to a point, and I'll think, okay, what could it be here? Could it be, you know, some Hammond? Could it be a sax? Could it be some trumpet, guitar solo? And there's so many options. A lot of the time, I've left the solo parts kind of blank, and then decide once I've kind of finished a few more tracks, I'll come back and go listen and think, actually, do you know what? It can't be sax. It needs to be trumpet or trombone or, you know, something. You just sort of hear it, hear what sounds right, and then go about putting it on.
You mentioned Planet Caravan as a song that didn't work in this jazz style. Were there any, and you seem to struggle to come up with others. Were there any others that just don't work?
There was some that I didn't think worked when I did the first record, um, but I think what's happened over the years since Volume Two, and then obviously the new 1968 tapes, I've just got better at the process. So I was really nervous when I did the first one because I thought, what happens if it's shit? What happens if it's like if it's really bad? And then it's a, you know, there was a chance that might happen, you know, and you just don't know. Um, but you know, but fortunately, it wasn't. It all kind of it all came together really well, and I sort of got some confidence from it, thinking actually, no, I can do this. I could do another one. Then it was a whole other challenge making sure I could play live because it's an absolute roast. I mean, your hands, you know, ache at the end of a gig. It's there's, you know, if I was paid per note, I'd be a very wealthy man.
Was this all like a secret way for you to get to play jazz more? Like your career, at least on Wikipedia and stuff, is a lot of prog and rock and heavy metal stuff. And like I didn't have an opportunity to dive too deep into your solo catalog to the new album, the newest album, yes, but like before that, is this all just like I want to play jazz?
Do you know what? It's funny that my dad always drummed into me from a young age. He's going, "There's no money in jazz. There's no money in jazz." And there's a very well-known joke about how do you make £1 million in jazz? Well, you start with 2 million. You know, that's kind of the running joke there. But um, I just it's a way, it's an outlet to be, joking aside, not just playing all the notes that you're not allowed to play when you're working for somebody else, but it's a way of being creative with something that's already been created. That the music is so well known, it's so um, sort of etched into the history of music, to be able to detangle it and go into a completely different direction. I mean, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. They said, you know, don't you want to do something more creative rather than just cover songs? And I said no, because this isn't a covers band. This isn't about playing covers. This is about recreating something from something that's already existing. And that process is just as creative to me as writing a whole new album. I could write a whole album in this style, and people that don't know Sabbath music would not know any different. Do you know what I mean? I could almost start again. I could do a 1965 album of songs that even Black Sabbath haven't recorded. Who knows where it's gonna go. But personally, I find it very creative. It's just a different approach to music.
The folks behind the social media accounts, which I think would assume that the names on them, so your Tonys, your Geezers, your Aussies, have all shared the Jazz Sabbath stuff, so they are down with it. Have you considered having any of them guess on any of these versions, or do you think that would definitely ruin the lore of the band? But like,
Yeah, so I'm constantly put in check by Mark at the record label, because he's Dutch and unbelievably precise with the story. Mark has helped write the documentaries. He does all the liner notes. He's absolutely, he's brilliant. And one thing he is very careful with continuity. So we make sure that, you know when things are played or they're placed in certain places, the dates have to tie up with the story, and all that. So we've got it pretty covered, up to this point. And I think by having, you know say Tony come on and play, it would put an end to all of that. And although now album 3 people kind of know the story, um, it's kind of, I don't want to ruin it. I just want to keep it going.
okay. I mean, we emailed a bit, and I wasn't sure if I'd be talking to you or to Milton. So like, when this goes out, am I supposed to say some asshole claims that he also wrote these songs or something?
Well, you can say however you like, Daniel. But the only reason that I'm not dressed up as Milton is it takes me about an hour to get the makeup and hair sorted.
We could have done all audio, like it's totally fine. But
Ah,
I appreciate the video thing, but like, I'm mostly an audio program. I'll put up the video because I have it, but like, eh, well, next time for album number 4. Do you see the songs going beyond 1973? Because I think that's kind of where the cutoff is at this moment. But like, I think Dirty Women or Air Dance, or maybe even perhaps controversially, It's All Right would be really cool in this style.
yeah, I think my comfort, with this is with the Aussie era
Sure.
Sabbath. Um, and I mean, the only reason I've kept it like that is because I know that catalogue so well after what has been 20 years of playing, keyboards and bit of guitar, off stage for them live. I've sort of I feel I genuinely know those songs well enough to be able to pull this off, kind of, um, in with a sort of genuine approach. That's my feeling when I started it, and kind of how I feel still now. So I'm not planning on going, much further. But at the same time, I didn't really plan much after the first album. I wasn't thinking, right, I could get 4 albums out of this. I literally just thought, well, that's that project, and it did well enough. Then COVID happened, so I didn't do any live shows. So by the time sort of everything was opening up and I could do some shows, it was kind of going down really well. So it kind of felt natural to go on and do another album.
Do you and Zach have any sort of beef about the Aussie employed guys having their own Sabbath? bands? Because he also has
Yeah,
Zach Sabbath.
he does. What I mean, the funny thing is, the first arrangement I did was 2016, I think it was, or 2017 of this stuff, and I think Zach started his in about 2017. It was like just slightly after, and I remember thinking, he's bloody got there first. Zach's got there first with the. But I think it's great. I think the fact. I mean, I would love to do a festival of, there's Black Sabbath, there's Brown Sabbath, there's all these brilliant bands. It would be amazing to have a weekend of Sabbath, but all these different bands doing Jazz Sabbath, have Zach Sabbath. So yeah, one day I'll try and get that together.
It's funny you mention that. Probably after a lot of beer myself, kind of just talked at somebody about my idea for the like perfect last Sabbath slash Ozzy show, which would be to have Jazz Sabbath, Zach Sabbath, all these other kind of cover band sort of things come out, tributes, etc. for the day, evening. It's like a long set full of guests, that kind of thing. So like if someone on the inside's thinking of it, it's gotta happen. So like make some calls.
Oh,
Thank you. We'll
it
appreciate
would
it.
be, it'd be great. Name check for you, Daniel. Don't worry.
Have you met the Mac Sabbath folks? Because I had their air quotes manager, who I think is the Ronald MacDonald Osborne, whatever character on
Okay,
before.
I haven't. I've only just seen the clips online. I know. Jack Osbourne showed Ozzy them at some point. I think that was on his TV show.
Yeah.
I've seen some clips online, and it just looks awesome.
Those are wild guys that will not break the lore. Because like I said, I talked to their manager, air quotes, but anyway. So you're playing the Cruise to the Edge next year with Jazz Sabbath with a lot of prog bands and actual past guests from the show, Pure Reason Revolution. It's still 6 or 7 months away, but how would you prepare for this show or these shows differently than you would a typical Jazz Sabbath show, knowing it's like more rock heads or something? Or would you?
I'm not going to change anything.
Cool.
It's what I've realised from doing this, especially live, is there's the first few shows we did. In fact, one of the first shows we played was in Leverkusen Jazz Festival in Germany, and I think it's fair to say I was a little nervous, a bit apprehensive. We were on stage before Jamie Cullum, who's an awesome British jazz pianist. There was a whole, very credible lineup on this festival, and us, and I can't. At the beginning, I couldn't help feeling slightly nervous that somebody's going to stand up and point at me and go, "You're a fraud," which I think is probably why the character works so well. Is that I could just say, "Well, yes, they are frauds. I'm the real thing," and that the character kind of almost lends itself to being able to get away with it to people that might not think it's credible jazz. What I realised after the first couple of shows is people really like it. They love the kind of comedy aspect to it, the entertainment side of it, but more importantly, they get the music and the music works, and and I don't feel like a fraud. It's a very strange emotional journey. Those first few shows, the Leverkusen Jazz Festival, they said, can we put one? They televised the festival, and they said, can we show one track on the TV, and we'll put it up for streaming 2 weeks before. So they do live streaming for 2 weeks, then they show the clip. They had 1 million views of our show, and they said it was so popular. They said, can we show the whole show on TV, on German TV? So obviously said, yeah, of course. So they put that on TV. They took it down off the internet, and then they put it back up for streaming again a month later. And I think it's about 1 million streams again now. So it's a real, a credit to them, because they were one of the first festivals that had us on. And it was just, I think, refreshing to some people. It was just something a bit different. So every place we played in Romania, Slovenia, Italy, Australia. We played in LA a couple of nights in LA. Done a couple of UK tours, Netherlands. Everywhere we go, anywhere that people know Black Sabbath, they get this and they understand it, and they have a good night. It's not a struggle to enjoy yourself at a Jazz Sabbath show. That's the that's the key. It's complex, and it's, you know, it's an emotional kind of play. If you're a musician, you know, it's quite intense, but there's enough elements of comedy in there that that people go away thinking that was a night of entertainment.
A quick aside. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I usually allot about a half hour. I do have some more questions. Do I have a little
Oh,
more time?
go for it. No,
Okay.
I'll talk until you run out of tape.
Look,
Honestly.
I mean, Jazz Sabbath's right up my alley. I could ask you like by every single note if I really wanted to dive into it because I think it's super fun and it's really weird. And when I say it out loud, people around me go like, "Oh yeah, of course you are. You're the biggest Black Sabbath fan I know, and you like to put a spin on anything you like." So for sure. But I want to kind of talk about your career outside of Black Sabbath a little bit. Sent you are slash were in a band called Headspace. The internet kind of seems I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of information there. Uh,
No, so yeah, we took the website down actually a while ago. So we did an album back in 2012 called I Am Anonymous. The band originally started 2006, and the idea was uh, there's five of us friends who we work with a lot of other bands, and although it's brilliant when you're working for other bands, you're not with your mates. You're working, and you make friends when you're away, but they're not necessarily your old friends from years ago who you just never get a chance to see. So most of my friends, you know, are, you know, either from, I've got a group of friends from when I was back at school, or they're musicians. That's generally the kind of two camps of people, because when you're a musician, you're touring all the time, you make friends on each tour. Um, so I put this band together of my friends, basically Damien Wilson on vocals, Peter Renard on guitar, Richard Brooke at the time on drums, and Lee Pomeroy on bass. And it was basically an excuse to get together to write whatever we wanted to write and make an album, which we signed to Inside Out, and we did. We ended up doing two albums for them. What we realised, unfortunately, was that we didn't have enough time to all be in the right place at the same time and do a tour. And we all have families, and back then we all had young families, and there was no way that we could go and tour America for 2 months and earn 50 quid. You know, we weren't 20 years old. You
mhm.
know, we were the wrong kind of age to be doing, you know, doing your band. But we love seeing each other, and we love the process of writing the music. And we did a few short tours, a handful of shows, and then Lee went off with ELO. I went back out with Ozzy again, and it was kind of, then it was 2 years past, and then we were like, well, are we ever going to get time to get together? We wanted to do it collectively, where we're at least three of us are in a room together, rather than, you know, the more kind of common method now, which is sending files to people and, you know, and doing it all remotely. The whole point of it was that we're all mates and we want to see each other.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, funnily enough, Monday and Tuesday of this week, I had Damien Wilson here and Peter Rinaldi here, and we were writing the third album, the new
Oh, snap.
Headspace album. So
Wonderful.
that's what we're doing, and we've got some shows planned for November next year.
Now you got to put that website back up, unfortunately.
I know that's the problem, yeah. But it's going to be one of those things that be like, where's that password? Where's the, you know, those kind of moments.
Well, that's cool. You also covered my next thing, which was how does that process work for that band? So three of you hop in a room. How has it been like getting back in a room though, like with so much time? Does it feel like time has passed? Like what's the is something different this time than all that you fear is gone? I forget the year on it.
Yeah, that was so not so Damien Wilson and I, we've made, since that time, we've made four albums together, just as a
Okay.
duo, called Wilson and Wakeman, and they're very much singer-songwriter. We basically come into my studio, we sit at the piano, he's got a guitar, and we bounce ideas off each other, and we write quite quickly and in a kind of singer-songwriter style for about 2 days, leave it a week or so, comes back for another couple of days, and we do that for a couple of months, and an album comes relatively quickly. I then sort of do most of the recording and sort of production in here. So I'm used to seeing Damien and touring with Damien with our duo. So it didn't seem weird at all. Pete Rinaldi, I see quite a bit on other gigs. You know, we cross paths, you know, with various kind of session gigs, and we're old friends as well, so we speak on the phone quite a bit. So it didn't seem weird, and the process was, it seemed pretty, you know, pretty painless. It was good.
Good. That's good to hear. Now, dialing in on you yourself, in 2021, you had a solo record come out that was in the midst of the pandemic. And from everything I read about it, it felt like it seemed like a very different record for you and kind of like having to stay still and produce something very different. Do you feel like that opened up something for you going forward, or is that just like an isolated record that's gonna be a time capsule of this other side for you?
It's weird because that's the most, for me, um, a handful of memories, which is the album that you're referring to, is a it's a solo piano um, album, which is a very it's kind of modern classical. It's played live in a small theatre with microphones. There's no reverb on anything. It's just microphones on a piano. You can hear the noises of the creaking of the pedals. It's a lovely 9-foot Steinway Model D piano. Um, and I wanted it to sound like you were sat next to me at the piano. That was how I wanted the record to sound. Like it was the easiest album to mix ever for Gary Stevenson, who mixed the album. I said to him, actually, I said, I've got two albums I need you to mix. I said, uh, first one is going to be really easy. And he was looking for things to do. I said, no, don't do anything. Just get the EQ, get the balance of the mics right and the room, and that's it. And he said, well, I'll put a bit of reverb. I was like, no, take the reverb off. I don't want any reverb. I don't want it to sound unnatural at all. I want it to sound completely natural. And he was like, well, I've got nothing to do. I said, yeah, but you will have on the next album, which is a Jazz Sabbath record. I said, you're going to have a lot to do on that one. So I sort of gave with one hand and took away with the other. But I mean, I was originally a pianist. That's my, I went through the classical grades. So I think of myself as most comfortable at a piano. And the first album or second album I did with my dad was a kind of neoclassical piano album. So I kind of started there. So this for me feels a little bit like returning to that kind of era. And if, as I say, I feel most comfortable just sat behind a piano and noodling away or doing arrangements on a piano. And it came at a time where a lot of musicians will relate to how when you take away the live performance avenue, there's only so much stuff you can do in a studio before you go a bit mad. If you're used to just working in a studio and that's all you do and you don't play live, then you wouldn't have noticed any difference during the pandemic. If you make 80% of your income by playing live, which is predominantly what I do, you take that away and you're left with a very kind of small amount of money you can earn, and thinking, well, what am I going to do? And I went into the studio for a little bit, after painting the fences and mowing the lawn, and everybody going, well, this isn't so bad. Then I realised quite quickly I needed to earn some money, so I wasn't able to do that. I didn't want to teach online because everybody was kind of seemed to be doing online teaching. So I became a builder and a carpenter for the best part of a year. So I was working on various, it's a hobby of mine. I've always loved kind of, that side of stuff. Anything building, construction, carpentry, I've always really loved it. Renovated my old house and this house here. And I was working on quite a few different houses and wasn't playing at all. Just had no inclination. I thought, what's the point? What am I going to sit down and play for? There's no gigs and there was no end in sight. There was just, so I didn't play for a year. And I then started doing some work on my dad's house. He just bought a house over near Ipswich, on the east coast of England. And it was empty apart from one room where he'd moved a piano in. So I was renovating this house, and then one evening I just sat at the piano, and I hadn't played for a year. I had no interest in playing. I just thought there's no point until I know that we've got an end in sight. I wasn't going to play. And then I started, that's where I wrote the album, was all at this house that I was renovating for my dad, on his old grand piano that he had in this house. So it was a really kind of emotional time because I was on my own in this house. There was nobody else living there. I was on an airbed in the corner of this building site, essentially, for 2 weeks at a time. I'd go home for 2 or 3 days, then I'd go back over there and stay there for another 2 weeks, working on the house. So I never really saw anybody. It was like a weird sort of hermit type existence. And then, but I felt comfortable sitting down at the piano again. And then I wrote it all out kind of old school. And then I went into the theatre to record it with all the scores, and said to the engineer, right, just start and stop when I say start and stop. And then they're all recorded live, they're all played live. There's no trickery, there's no quantizing. It's just a really natural sounding album. So it might seem like it's kind of out of place in my career perhaps, but for me it feels like I've just gone back to the start, because that's where I finished with grade 8, piano and the kind of classical training.
An album I liken it to in my head is also, I mean, this one has a lot of reverb. It's got Paisley Park touches on it, but the posthumous vault, whatever you want to call it, album from Prince, Piano Microphone. It feels like you are a fly on a wall, kind of witnessing something you maybe shouldn't. And there's a weird beauty to that about it. And I think the record's really cool. And, hopefully you don't have to do that sort of thing again, but should you? I think it was cool.
Oh, excellent. And I liked it. I named it, like, the handful of memories idea was to have it as um, each piece was inspired by a thought of somewhere that I'd been, whether it be on a tour or on holiday with my family somewhere. My wife, plans some quite um, what's the word I'm looking for? Exciting holidays, put it that way. We tend to not go to the beach and sit on the beach for very long. It's always a case of, let's go to Egypt, or let's go to Morocco and surf on sand dunes, or let's go, out into the jungles in Peru. It's always, my wife is very adventurous when it comes to organising family holidays. So I had quite a few places to draw on. I remember one place in particular, there's a track on there called Dra Valley, which we were in Morocco driving through the desert and stopped at this place called Valley of the Palms. And it's just this several miles in the middle of nowhere of this valley of palm trees. And all the houses, all the sort of kasbahs are all kind of made of mud. And I woke up really early, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I went running. And it was the most surreal thing I think I've ever experienced, being in the desert, but with all these palm trees. And then you see like a load of kids going to school in kind of really smart uniforms. And it was just a really obscure memory. And that was an obvious choice for one of the pieces. It just kind of, those memories for me, I can put the record on and read the liner notes, and I can be back there straight away. It's a really a lovely memory.
I feel like having you on, I'd be foolish not to at least ask some questions about Sabbath and your tours with them. I saw, I essentially saw you twice on the farewell tour, and I guess other times that is maybe not aware of it. But I saw you in Oakland and San Jose, and I forget which tour it was, but you were invited to poke your head out of your tent and give a wave to the audience, which I thought was very nice and very just like kind of odd though. What did you have in your offstage kind of still stage adjacent booth there?
It was, first of all, it is a very unusual experience, because to all other purposes, the touring is exactly the same as if I was touring with Ozzy, for example. So, Ozzy's band is very much the group of us, and we're all on stage, we all fly together, we all have meals together. It's all very, it's very sort of social. It's a very close kind of band, and your involvement on stage is all part of the band. Obviously, with Sabbath, it's completely different. It's, for when I've mostly been working for them, it's been the 3 guys. When I first started with them, Bill Ward was playing drums, so it was the 4 guys. And you're like the extra piece. You're kind of the sort of gingerhead stepchild, if you like. Pushed off to the side in the booth. And it doesn't worry me at all. Some people seem to think that it would be kind of a, you know, you would feel it was a problem, but whether it's that that's an ego thing or whatever. And I'm not, you know, for me, it's about the music and it's about whatever I can bring to it to make it better. Then that's my job. If I have to do that on stage, in a tent, in a dressing room, whatever, that's what the job takes. And I think that's the, with for any musicians out there, any job you do, any band you work with, you have to work out exactly what it is that you're required to do. And that doesn't always mean musically. You know, it might mean keep your mouth shut and just listen to people, or to know when to leave a room, or to know when to put your arm around somebody and you know, give them a hug, and to see when people need some support, you know. And that's your kind of whole touring family. And I'm not sort of saying that in relation to Sabbath, but generally that has been something that I think has kept my, you know, kept me employed a lot of the time, is that, you know, hopefully I like to think that I can, you know, I can play enough to be in, you know, to be able to contribute and do the right job in whatever band. But ultimately it's about the people, and you're with people a lot of the time. And if you can't get on with people, then it doesn't matter how good a player you are, you just become a pain in the ass, you know. And that's the kind of, I was so lucky with those guys in that they're so old school. They're kind of, you know, you almost have to prize stories out of them about the past, you know, because everyone wants to know what was it like back in the 70s. You know, I have these conversations with my dad, you know, you almost have to kind of prize the stories out of him, because, you know, I guess they're bored of talking about it and they're just chatting about other stuff. But I love it. I just love that my whole experience of those, which was pretty much, you know, 20 years with Sabbath, was I never thought it would last that long, that I would be there for that long. And it didn't worry me that I was in a tent or whatever, because all the other aspects of the touring was the same as any other tour. We'd travel together, we'd be in the same hotel, we'd all eat together, we'd go for walks. Tony would walk every day, so I'd go for walks with Tony. And it was just a really fun, and we'd walk to the stage together, and then I'd go off in the tent, and it would be like, Tony would be like, yep, see you at the end, glass of wine after, yep, great. And then that would be it. And then I'd be in the tent and I'd be sort of looking at this thing here across the stage. And I ended up playing more guitar. By the end of the time with Sabbath, I think I only played 3 songs on keyboards. The rest I was doubling guitar. And that was purely down to, Tony saw me play on an Ozzy show and said, I didn't realize you played guitar. And I said, well, you didn't ask, you know. I did. And he was like, would you be comfortable playing more guitar when we do the Sabbath tours? And I said, I'll play the spoons. Whatever you think is going to make it sound better, I'll do whatever you like. So, and it just lent itself to have a bit more rhythm guitar, especially for when, you know, Tony's soloing, just to keep a little bit of rhythm going. And that was, you know, that was the kind of thing, that was the, you know, Tony just wants it to sound great. He doesn't care what is going on. I think just before, it was just always keyboards, and the keyboard player played keyboards. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't looked at maybe in the same way. But for me, it's just trying to make the best show possible. And whether that be, you know, in the front of the stage behind a grand piano, or in a tent to the side of the stage, it doesn't really make any difference as long as the show's good.
Sure. So like in that tent, so you said you had a slot where you could see the stage. You just have your own little wine cellar, like not cellar, but
The funny thing is, and this is from, I guess I'm 50 now, so that's 32 years of doing this. I realized really early on that if I made a mistake on a gig, if I'd had anything to drink,
makes sense.
then I get, you know, I can blame myself about drinking, whether it's a pint, whether it's 2 pints, or whatever it is. So very early on, I kind of said to myself, I can't drink before a show, because if I make a mistake, I want to be able to say to myself, you made a mistake because you weren't concentrating. I don't want to say to myself, you made a mistake because you're pissed or you're drunk or whatever. And for me, it's just way easier to just not have anything to drink, and I love a drink, and just have a drink after the show. That way, it takes away any kind of um, you know blame that I might pass on to having a drink before a show, and I can just concentrate on the show. And if I make a mistake, I can get over it really quickly and move on. Whereas if I'd have had a drink, which when I was younger, I certainly, played a few shows and had a few drinks, you would then be halfway through the next song thinking, fuck, I wish I hadn't had a beer. That maybe I wouldn't have made that mistake. And then you make another mistake because you're thinking about something else that was happening earlier. So yeah, it's I've forgotten the original question now. I've gone off in a
Don't worry about it. I mean, that informed me enough. Like, but also I kind of get it because like you're also working, you know.
exactly, yeah. No, if I was a taxi driver, I wouldn't be, yeah, all right, I'll drop you here, mate.
Yeah, of course.
It's,
So I'll start winding us down. A question I like to ask everybody I have on the show. What was your first band called and what did it sound like?
first proper band
Or the
was
first time
called.
you thought you were in a band, I guess, because I have some of those
Okay,
ones.
so the first that I would say was called Close to Classic, and it was I was probably 15, and it was a guy called Richard Fay on guitar, um, Paul Walker on bass, Richard Crossman on vocals and drums, and it was a four-piece band. And like all 14 and 15-year-old kids in a band, you thought, this is it. This is going to be and of course it wasn't. It lasted about 18 months, and everyone moved on and did something else. But we printed our own cassettes and did all those things that bands should do, and make their own music and write their own music, and it was brilliant. And I haven't seen Paul Walker for a long time. Richard Fay, the guitar player, um, he writes music for. I have a music publishing library, a production music library for TV and film. We have about, I don't know, 300 writers and 5,000 tracks, 6,000 tracks, and he is one of the writers for that. So I've kept up to speed with him since I was 14, 15.
What did that band sound like? Like if you were to liken it to a band we may have heard of.
Oh, I mean, it probably sounded terrible.
Oh,
Uh, I would think it wasn't like it was kind of piano rock. We're all really into Van Halen back then, a mixture of sort of Van Halen and Zeppelin, but probably with terrible keyboard sounds.
I imagine this might be harder to answer, but like with your dad being who your dad is, did you ever feel like a sense of rebellion? Like, no, no prog. We're going punk. We're going three chords and a fuck you. Like, just complete opposite direction musically. Like, still be in music, but just be like, no, this is noise.
I'll be honest with you. I've never really thought too much about it because I just followed whatever seemed to work. The only time it's backfired is I got asked to do an album for somebody. They wanted a recreation of Yes songs, and I did it because I was skint and I had no money and I had rent to pay. So it was a job, and I took the job. In hindsight, I should never have taken that job because what can you possibly do to Yes songs that isn't going to be compared to the original, and then everybody tell you that it's shit? So I did this album, and we had different singers come in and sing, and I kept wondering why the producer was saying we want different singers, and he wasn't that worried about the singers. And I was thinking, you can't just replace John Anderson with random singers; it's not going to work. But he wanted all the tracks recreated, really, really close to the original. And I thought, well, there's nothing creative here. But anyway, we put the album together, did it, got paid, and then I realised that I think they'd done a deal with one of these karaoke companies. So they weren't interested in the top line. They
Oh,
put it out
wow.
as an album. It still crops up. Random, labels seem to be licensing this album um, that I don't get a penny from, and I'm pretty sure yes, probably don't get a penny from
Probably
either.
not.
But I think that's how they made their money, is they're just using them as karaoke backing tracks. So if you're singing "Owner of a Lonely Heart" or or Fragile in a club somewhere, then chances are it's my backing track that we did. But that's the only time I've thought, actually, do you know what? I shouldn't have done that. Everything else, I've just gone, yeah, I'm enjoying that. I'm going to do it. I'm not really that bothered about, whether people think I'm doing something that's too close to dad or, too proggy. It's been my sort of career's been varied from very kind of, pop bands to kind of indie bands to, folk bands, prog rock bands. It's all music, as long as you
Sure.
can, as long as you can get on with people, that really is, it's not, it's not going to kill you. It's just music.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on the show. It's an absolute honor to talk to you. I love the records. I have, the audio of the third one. I've got it pre-ordered. I'm very excited for it. Could we, as Jazz Sabbath fans in the States, expect seeing you guys out here a bit more? I know of a handful of jazz clubs in the Bay Area that would probably be great.
Do you know what we came out and did two shows in LA. I did a tour with Uriah Heep and Saxon in
Mhm.
earlier in the year. Their keyboard player, Uriah Heep's keyboard player, was unable to do the 2 months. So I came out, did the shows, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity. I'll go to LA afterwards. I've got some meetings to do with my music library I can have while I'm there. Um, and yeah, APM, which is this production music library that we work closely, or I work closely with, basically put on two shows for us at Catalina Jazz Club in Los Angeles. So I used some Tim Landers on bass and Tal Bergman on drums. Absolutely awesome guys. We did two shows and it was great. And the problem was we couldn't do any more. I couldn't bring the guys over from the UK because there wasn't enough time to get visas, and it's unbelievably expensive to get visas for
That's what I
Americans.
keep
Just
hearing.
and the only way to make it work is to come out for 4 or 5 months, and to come out for that amount of time and tour. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to kind of to come with, and we just don't have the support from a lot of agents and promoters. They don't really know what to do with Jazz Sabbath, which is why myself and the label, we book it all ourselves. We either hire the venues, or we contact all the festivals. We do it all ourselves because it seems to frighten agents and promoters. They really don't kind of get it. The only person, actually, one exception um, that I can think of off the top of my head is a guy called Anthony Blaney in Australia. He contacted us and said, I don't care what it takes, I've got to get you guys to Australia, we'll make it work. And we went there about 6, 8 weeks ago and did 9 shows, 8 sold out shows, 9 shows. Unbelievable trip. It was absolutely amazing. We did jazz clubs, we did little theatres, um,
Had your
and
own
it was
gin?
and yeah, we did our own gin, the Jazz Sabbath gin, and you know, it just shows it works everywhere, and we're not unrealistic to think that we're going to be playing Madison Square Gardens. This is a kind of theatre show. It's a jazz club show, a mixture of the two, and it works everywhere. We can go everywhere, and you know that's what I'm enjoying spending the time doing, is opening a map and go Romania. Okay, let's find a jazz club in Romania. Contact the jazz club. Do you want us to come and play a show? And then it's just like that, and it's just you kind of find all these mad places around the world, and yeah, hopefully there'll be more of them.
All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on the show. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording here.